Good morning. My name is Emily Underwood. I'm the Community Initiative Specialist at the Missouri Historical Society. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today for this installment of the STL History Live series, reflecting on Native American resilience in the era of coronavirus with Deborah Taffa. The Missouri Historical Society hosts 2 to 3 STL History Live programs every week. So be sure to check out the full lineup. You can find that on our website, which is mohistory.org, or you can also find that under the events section of the Missouri History Museum Facebook page. We also have a new series starting called How Did We Get Here, which explores race issues in St. Louis and around the nation. That kicks off tonight at 6:30 p.m. with Crystal Fleming, who's the author of How to Be Less Stupid About Race, who's going to talk about critical race theory and dismantling racism. Before we get started with today's presentation, I do want to take a moment to express a little bit of gratitude with a big thank you to all of our members. We are so appreciative of you now and always. Your donations do help keep our program series running, just like this one. They're helping to keep our building open right now, so we really appreciate it. If you're not a member but want to learn more about our membership program, I did post a URL in the chat, so you're welcome to go and click on that and get a little bit more info. And I also want to recognize the support from the Zoo Museum Tax District with a big thank you to all of you here in the St. Louis area for your tax contributions. At the end of today's program, we will have some time for Q&A, and you can submit your questions through the Q&A button that you'll find in the toolbar, which is probably at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have. And then also, if you want to go back and watch this program later, you can find it or share it with anyone. You can find it on the Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel, and these programs get posted on the Monday following the program. So next Monday, you should be able to find this on our YouTube channel. And then finally, at the end of the presentation, we would love to get your feedback. So at some point during this program, a tab is going to pop up in your browser with a very short survey. It should really just take a couple of minutes of your time. And it really is important to us to know what you think about these programs. So please fill it out and let us know. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get to today's program. I'm going to go ahead and start a video here. Oops, Deborah's going to have to start her own video. Deborah Taffa is our speaker today. She's an enrolled member of the Yuma Nation and Laguna Pueblo tribes. She's a writer and educator currently teaching creative nonfiction at the MFA program at Washington University in St. Louis. In 2018, she was named a fellow with the Brooklyn publisher, A Public Space, and she also received the Ellen Malloy Desert Writers Award the same year. And her writing has appeared in The Best Travel Writing, Salon, The Rumpus, Prairie Schooner, and many other places. She's a co-writer with Stratigraphic Productions, and in that role, she provides a Native perspective on documentaries. She co-wrote Digadohi, which has been featured in film festivals internationally. She's also a board member with the Missouri Humanities Council, where she was instrumental in the creation of a Native American heritage program in Missouri. And she's also a board member for St. Louis's oldest literary magazine, A River Styx. And we're just so happy she's able to join us today. And I'm going to turn this over to Deborah now. And Deborah, thanks for being here, and the screen is yours. Sorry, Deborah, your unmute can you unmute yourself because it's not working for me?
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I know that we're living in challenging times. I think at best, I wish that you have been having a quiet time with family, a time to reflect and meditate, think about what's important in life. We tend to get very busy in our everyday world, and I'm a victim of that as well. I'm always running around, so it's been a time of just stopping. And I think that's the silver lining in this for me now, considering all these health challenges that are going around the world, to just take that moment to slow down and listen and tell stories with our families. And I'm going to tell you today a Native American story. So I always begin all my talks with a land acknowledgement. And there's an app you can actually get on your phone so that no matter where you are in the United States, you can look at whose tribal land you are standing on. So please take a deep breath and remember the ancestors with me today. St. Louis sits on Illini land, from Cahokia to the Osage. They love the forest and rivers and hills of Missouri. And this land is land that Osage never ceded, but were forced to give up even as they wish they didn't have to. And I hope everyone listening today can feel grateful in their heart for the sacrifice that they made so we can live and work in the city today. My outline for today's talk is now on the screen. We're going to be addressing the following. You'll get some background information on Native Americans, as well as a more personal account of my experience with the pandemic. We'll also discuss some wrong-headed notions about American history and new scientific findings about the continent. The spiritual crisis of former pandemics and where we go from here will also be discussed. Finally, I'll touch on important health issues for Native people in case you want to help tribes in need. Who am I? I am an enrolled citizen of the Quechan-Yuma Nation, a reservation located in southeastern California, as well as a descendant of Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. Like many Southwest Native people, I also have Latina ancestors. Mine are from Socorro, New Mexico. My father was the fifth of 10 kids born to long married parents, and my mother was the eldest of 15 kids born to two strict Catholics who also stayed married for over 50 years. I was born and raised in Yuma, Arizona, but attended school on in a Navajo reservation border town as a teenager. I chose this slide because I wanted to highlight that Indigenous people are dual citizens who often marry outside their tribe and move all over the country to serve in the military, go to school, and find jobs. To be clear, we vote in US elections even as we belong to sovereign tribal nations inside the United States. Every tribe has different criteria for membership. Eastern tribes often require very little blood quantum, while Western tribes like my own must see that you're at least a quarter blood to enroll. Let me just say that I view the entire country through an Indigenous lens. Whether I'm in a state with no reservation or in a state with many, I always feel the presence of the ancestors in the land. I currently live in St. Louis, Missouri, but I'm speaking to you from Oahu, where I'm quarantined with my pregnant daughter. She's in the center of the photo, my 2-year-old grandson, and her ohana. It was a scary thing flying here in a pandemic, but her husband, who was born and raised in Hawaii, that's him on the left, is currently deployed in the Middle East, and she was feeling lonely and unsettled, so I took the risk and came. Like many Americans, the beginning of the pandemic struck me as surreal. My husband has family in Milan, Italy, and as their COVID news began to come in by the phone, I was starting to have sleepless nights and very vivid dreams. My mother had died in January, so I was already feeling fragile. And suddenly there was this seismic shift, an adjustment that created a ton of worry for my children. I had a son in New Haven, Connecticut, who was finishing his senior year of college, and a daughter in DC who was working as a law assistant. And there was a mad scramble to get them home. And after the dust settled, I was on a Zoom call with colleagues, and talking to them, it suddenly hit me how hard it all felt. And I grew quite emotional as I mentioned that I had never felt so close to my ancestors, many of whom had died in the 19th century smallpox pandemic. One of those colleagues works with the History Museum, and when she heard my thoughts, she asked me if I would give this talk today. Growing up, my father took me and my siblings camping and horseback riding. He told us traditional stories from the reservation and emphasized the importance of working in the great outdoors. My grandparents talked a lot about living in harmony with the earth, and my great-grandma knew all about medicinal herbs. We have a long lineage in my family of waging legal battles for the earth. This picture was taken on my home reservation the day after my mother's funeral in January 2020. My father, Ed Jackson, is on the left, and my uncle Mike is on the right. He's my only surviving uncle. He served as chairman of our tribe for nearly a decade, and during his time in office, our tribe waged a legal battle, Arizona versus California, for our traditional water rights. This was before I moved to Missouri, and I was living on the reservation with my husband and kids. In those years, we took part in protests that prevented a Canadian company from mining our sacred sites and lobbied Congress to pass the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. On the left, you'll see depictions of a Native American dying of smallpox. When natives were sick in the 19th century, Their families flocked to their bedsides and caught the disease themselves. This history is such a large part of our cultural story that the current pandemic feels strangely familiar. All our lives, we have heard stories of children getting sick and dying at Indian boarding schools, about mass graves and few survivors. Yet, even as a student of history and a woman with Native bloodlines, I'd never fully comprehended the difficulties my ancestors had lived through. And then suddenly this spring, the coronavirus put the history of my people in much greater focus. Like everyone, I was frightened by what I was seeing on the news, but I also had the opportunity to draw on what I knew about my familial strength. I realized that it helped to remember that against all odds, my ancestors were able to survive and continue their lineage, or I wouldn't be here today. And I began to reflect on what lessons I could learn from the current pandemic. Here, I'd like to back up just a little and make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to our ideas about Native Americans. The first thing to know is that we're incredibly diverse. If we were together right now in an auditorium, I'd ask for a show of hands. How many of you have ever visited an Indian reservation? There are certain stereotypes that abound about reservations. Everyone's down and out and miserable. But the truth is, the socioeconomic situation in Indian country is variable. Yes, it bends toward poverty, but there are some reservations like the Auction, where my sister works in Arizona, that are doing quite well. In this photo, you will see on the left my ancestors who wore dreadlocks. They did not braid their hair. And on the right, a Pueblo girl, a Hopi girl with hair buns. We have different languages as Native people, very different lifestyles and religions, pre-Columbian especially. When my family and I lived in Albuquerque, I told a woman who was originally from Wisconsin that I had just come back from a tribal funeral on my reservation. I explained that we cremated our dead, and she was super surprised and very suspicious that that when I told her that, because she said that she thought we buried our dead in trees. And I remember always laughing about that, and I assume that she read it in a movie or a book or heard it from someone. What I'm trying to say is it's important to understand that what you hear from one Native American might not be true of another. The tribes in this country are very diverse. There are, though, conversely, some things that we have in common. Our lands were all taken from us under the doctrine of discovery, a papal bull that was turned into US law and established a spiritual, legal, and political justification for the seizure of our lands. As recently as 2005, Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg cited this law to make a decision in the city of Sherrill versus the Oneida Nation. Another thing that we have in common, the legacy of forced assimilation via Indian boarding schools. Nearly every tribal nation in America had its children taken away from them. This assimilation effort was meant to kill traditional cultures and turn natives into capitalists. Remember this when you meet a Native person who doesn't seem traditional enough. It takes a lot of work to regain the knowledge about a culture after it's been lost. This is a picture of my father, his two brothers, and one of his cousins in the late 1940s. Despite being full-blood Native Americans, they were mixed tribes because their parents met at Indian boarding school. And I just find this so interesting. Their grandmother was Shoshone Paiute, but they hated wearing the Plains Indian attire she made for them because they lived on the Yuma reservation where it wasn't the traditional dress. I think Dad felt like he was appropriating a culture he didn't understand, which is ironic, but all of which is to say Native identity is very complicated. Take our family name Jackson. When the government forced the Yuma to sign their land away under the Dawes Act, the families that didn't want to sign ran into the hills, and the government officials signed for them in an act of fraud. Because the officials couldn't spell the odd Yuma names, they gave each of these families that ran away a president's name. Thus, on our reservation, many of the oldest families have president's names. Let's talk about the history that gets taught in most American schools. It generally goes something like this. The Americas were an untouched paradise and empty frontier. The land was so pristine, the earliest European explorers thought they'd stumbled upon the Garden of Eden when they saw the barely clothed natives on the shore. People wrote back to Europe and said the land was rich with natural resources. Bison, elk, and other game were plentiful. In South America, there was gold, and the natives had no interest in developing or shaping the land. It was free for the taking, a gift from God, an empty continent. The forfeiture built by indigenous indolence. That was how the story went. But at the turn of the 21st century, new research started to threaten this narrative. Writers like Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel, and Charles Mann, who wrote 1491. Before these two authors began revising what we know about pre-Columbian history. Their work earned them plenty of critical praise. A New York Times reviewer said that Charles Mann wrote in the best scientific tradition, carefully sifting the evidence, never jumping to hasty conclusions, giving everyone a fair hearing. So what did these books say? Mann leaned into the written accounts of 16th century explorers to make an argument about the number of people on the continent, as well as the sophistication of the cultures here. He provided Giovanni di Verrazzano's narratives about a densely populated American coastline, and Bartolome de la Casa's notes that the Americas were a veritable beehive of people. The books argued that the Americas were conquered less by man-made wars, more because Native Americans did not have the antibodies needed to fight European illnesses. In Native traditions, communities aimed to live in harmony with nature, and animals were not meant to be caged or domesticated in their view. Without living in close proximity to fowl and pigs, their bodies were not accustomed to germs. Now, some scientists said that these new claims made by people like Mann and Diamond were revisionist bluster. But I was hopeful at the time when these books came out that the truth would finally be told. The one bit of information I found especially fascinating when I read these books was the claim that very large populations, megacities, existed way earlier than imagined, and in places like Chaco, Cahokia, and other empires, the inhabitants had been shaping waterways and terraces, farming and controlling their natural landscape in a sustainable and cyclical pattern that was necessary to feed such large populations. So I liked the new research that was showing my ancestors knew how to use the earth without exhausting her. In 2018, LIDAR, or laser technology, began to prove that Jared Diamond and Charles Mann had been onto something when several enormous Mayan cities were found under the jungle canopy. By surveying the ground from an airplane, archaeologists discovered a vast network of roads and buildings that was right under their noses, though concealed by plant growth, decay, and time. Civilizations twice the size of medieval England, with an estimated population of 5 to 10 million, were discovered in southern Mexico and Guatemala. And what had seemed far-fetched or impossible in my childhood was now reality. Enormous indigenous populations once existed, but a pandemic had likely wiped them out way before American settlers arrived. Now, this may seem like a small distinction, but what is at issue here are the numbers. Low counters and high counters agree that the smallpox and other diseases killed off 95% of the pre-Columbian population. Illness ripped through the American hemisphere in the 16th century and didn't let up for nearly 200 years. But how many people died? This is the question. In the past, it was convenient to say that the Americas were only slightly populated because it made the land sound unused and therefore available. The truth may be harder to admit, and if this talk achieves anything, I hope it honors the numbers of people who died in the Americas rather than minimizes it. Many more lives than we realized are longing to be remembered. This article is from last year. The University College of London published research findings in January 2019 that said the pandemic that struck the Americas created an ecological collapse, that it was so severe it decimated Indian societies until they couldn't function, until they couldn't farm or shape their environment as they had been doing for centuries, and the earth took back their agricultural land. They said the settlers who arrived here in the 19th century thought the land looked so pristine because they were seeing it after an incredible pandemic. The article states, and I quote, "The disruption that followed led to a huge swath of abandoned farmland being reclaimed by fast-growing trees. This pulled down enough carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to eventually chill the planet. It's a cooling period often referred to in history as the Little Ice Age, a time when winters in Europe would see the Thames in London regularly freeze over. The question, therefore, is 95% of how many? In The Indian's New World, the author writes that Native America was thrown into a spiritual crisis as a result of these pandemics. Their shamans grew sick, the old herbs wouldn't work, and people couldn't understand why this was happening. A huge shift in thinking and re-examining of values resulted. It had to. Traditional cultural beliefs emphasize family, resilience, and a holistic relationship with nature. Something had gone out of balance, and not knowing how to restore that balance shook the very foundations of Native culture. I see this happening in our world today. I see all of us questioning how we live, work, and engage with our fellow human beings. Social unrest and spiritual pain always follow in the wake of a pandemic. And the fact that I can look to my ancestors before me and know that they survived this is a great solace to me in this time. Where do we go from here? What we know, cries to save the planet are really cries to save ourselves. Viruses hitch rides in the animal kingdom while waiting to leap across species, and these deadly leaps are becoming more common due to environmental and habitat destruction. Population growth increases production and makes the threat more real. The coronavirus is a wake-up call. We need to think about our relationship to nature in new, sustainable ways. If we don't learn how to take care of the earth, she will shock us and make sure that we listen. A toddler's interaction with a bat, likely displaced by mining and foresting, resulted in the Ebola outbreak. A pig eating fruit near bat droppings resulted in Malaysia's Nipah outbreak. The SARS outbreak came from a wildlife market in China. In the long road to civilization, we dug up natural resources, chopped down forests and polluted waters. We buy plastics and technology and it's supposed to make our life easier when in many ways it's only complicating things more. For many years, we have defined civilization as the ability to blast through mountain passes to shorten the length of freeways in order to get to our destination faster. But this was never the native definition of what it meant to be civilized. Perhaps the coronavirus is a time to think about how we want to define civilization in the years to come. In the words of Luther Standing Bear, one of my favorite old-time native writers, the man who sat on the ground in his teepee meditating on life and its meaning, accepting the kinship of all creatures and acknowledging unity with the universe of things, was infusing into his being the true essence of civilization. Finally, this talk would be a failure if I didn't highlight all the ways Native Americans are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19. And so I've compiled a list of the health disparities our nations face. My reservation back in southeastern California has one of the highest death rates due to diabetes of any tribal nation in the country. On the Navajo Nation, where I grew up, there's often not running waters in hogans, which makes it hard to wash your hands and avoid getting the illness. On the Ak-Chin and Gila River reservations outside Phoenix, the virus is raging, especially as they've opened their tribal casinos to the public again. Their income is completely reliant on hosting guests, and I'm very frightened to see where that ends. My sister works for one of these tribes, and she was devastated when they lost their tribal chairman a few months ago, of all things to an appendicitis, because he delayed too long going to the hospital, trying to avoid catching COVID. And my own family is holed up on the Yuma reservation, and it's getting really bad there too. I called my Uncle Mike the other day, and he was joking about bubble wrapping my Aunt Mona when she goes out shopping. But that's just our gallows humor in the face of real struggle, another sign of our resilience. Why disparities exist. Systemic racism has led to these problems, and the battle for visibility and help, Native Americans are often forgotten. And I think many people think that Native Americans get free things and we don't need a lot of help, but nothing could be further from the truth. When our treaties were signed, our land was replaced with the promise of health care in perpetuity. Native Americans are the only citizens in America with a right to health care. Anyone who's a member of a federally recognized tribe can visit an IHS. The problem with IHS is that it is severely underfunded. IHS consists of 33 hospitals, 59 health centers, and 50 health stations. But if you come from a Native people and you are not federally recognized, you're out of luck. And most of these hospitals are in very rural, isolated areas, and they're very overcrowded. Due to underfunding, Indian health service facilities are crisis-driven and leave a wide gap in adequate and preventative care for many Native Americans on the reservations. Pharmacies and doctor's offices outside of hospitals are completely non-existent in many communities. This is striking to me that the US government spends more money on Medicare recipients, veterans, and prisoners. Look at how little they give to American Indians. Access is an issue when you consider that 50% of American Indians now live off reservation. For example, my family, when we moved here from Albuquerque, and before that, the reservation, we had no access to healthcare. So back home, I birthed all my children at Indian Health Service hospitals, and I could take my children to be seen at those hospitals. And when we got to Missouri as self-employed citizens, it was very difficult to provide for our family. There are many problems with IHS that involve just physician failures, the dispensing of medication. I remember I went to the dentist one time on my reservation to say that I had a toothache, and he told me that after looking at my teeth, he said, "Your teeth are fine." It ended up being a sinus infection, but he told me maybe my mouth hurt from holding it open for so long. And I told him, well, it hurt before I came here. So it's pretty miserable sometimes. So just keep Native Americans in mind as we move forward in this pandemic. Watch the news and see what's happening across the country, and remember us when you when you get out to vote, or if you're thinking about donating to organizations. And to close my talk today, I'll just return to what I said in the beginning. We're living in this enormous moment, and it's a moment we should share. The future is uncertain and scary, but we should not turn away from each other in fear. I joke with my husband at night sometimes by telling him I talk to the virus when I wake up and I can't sleep, when I'm feeling unsettled and frightened. But it's not all in jest. In Native America, we say, "Nothing can be foreign to me. We are all related." And even this microscopic bug that threatens can teach us something. I think it may be a lesson that we need to learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I am pulling myself back up too. And we do have a question coming through.
Thank you.
Oh, somebody just wondered about, you mentioned a website or an app that identifies tribal locations. They're wondering if you can share what that is.
Okay, I don't have it right now, but it's easy to find. I think it's called Native Lands. And my husband has it on his phone and I have it on my phone. Just scroll through your apps or Google it and you'll find it. It's really wonderful because I occasionally give talks out east, or I gave a talk in Brooklyn last year, or in Utah recently, and I can get onto the app if I don't know what tribal people once lived there and figure it out for myself. So.
I don't have any questions right now, but I'm going to give people just a second. Sometimes it takes a minute for people to gather thoughts. I'm curious if you've gotten any sense, and I know you're not here representing every tribal community, but what the response is on reservations. I know we see out in the general public mixed responses on wearing masks, on going into gatherings, on going out to eat, and things like that. I'm wondering if there's a general sense that you have of what the response has been within Native communities.
Well, I know that in the Navajo Nation, for example, the response has been not very, it's not working very well. And again, I think it's because there's not enough resources for them. But the good thing about that is that many people in the Americas are seeing that on the news. And there have been a lot of collections and drives and people willing to help out. On my home reservation, they actually were very close to, we actually have land that abuts up to the international border with Mexico. and it has been shut down now, so there can be no travel going back and forth. So Yuma is this major hotspot. And talking for my family back there, I know that there's not a very strong reaction among the younger population. They're still out and about, and a lot of them are working. One of our casinos has reopened, the one that's in Arizona. It's a small casino. And we have a second one that's larger in California. And the state of California does not want them to open, and they're honoring that for now. Technically, we don't have to follow the guidelines of California as sovereign nations, but we've decided, I guess the government has decided, our tribal government has decided to keep that one closed. But I foresee that it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's what I am thinking. And we have a female judge who is also a member of our tribe. Her name is Claudette White. And I've recently seen on Facebook that she's starting to stir up some of the same energy that they created for the Dene Navajo people, to try to get some donations sent down, because there are always funding shortfalls. So if in the past we haven't had enough funding to take care of basic health needs, coronavirus is really going to throw us for a loop if people start to become hospitalized in high numbers. I'm a little surprised that it's hitting rural areas in such a strong way. I mean, the Navajo Nation is huge, it's enormous. So when you get out into the middle of it, it's really in the middle of the desert, for those of you who have never been there. And the border towns are far and few between, they're few and far between. But in Yuma, I'm not surprised that it's hitting so hard, because it's right across the river from the city of Yuma, which is a pretty bustling place. I think it's the 5th largest population in Arizona. And just to answer the last, what you were asking about the masks, my father lives in Phoenix, really close to the Gila River Reservation, and my sister works on Ak-Chin. And I think they're both a little disappointed by the community there and how they are. It's a conservative state, and a lot of people are not wearing masks.
I have a question about just any other book recommendations you might have to better understand Native American history or the modern Native American experience. I know you mentioned the 2 books in your talk, and actually, if you want to repeat those, I'll type those into the chat so people can have the titles.
It's Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. He's an excellent writer. They're both science writers. They write with a lot of research. And the other is Charles Mann, 1491.
Okay.
And they came out in the early 2000s, I think. Yeah. This was when the information, LIDAR had not been used yet. It hadn't been discovered, laser technology, basically. And a lot of what they were doing was supposition, asking questions, looking at archival information, and trying to put together information that went beyond the basic histories that we had always been told. But in terms of, I'm a creative writer. I do a lot of creative writing. So the books that I like tend to be poetry books or novels. And one of my all-time favorites is written by a Laguna Pueblo woman named Leslie Marmon Silko. And she wrote a book called Ceremony, which is about a Laguna soldier. He's half Laguna and half Hispanic. And he comes back from war and he's sick. And he has to find a ceremony to become whole again. And it involves Pueblo mythology, but also the modern world in a really interesting collision, right? I think that's one of the best that's been written. But I mean, I think if there's always Louise Erdrich, and there's a woman out of Mojave. She's one of our sister tribes in Arizona. Her name is Natalie Diaz. She wrote a poetry collection called When My Brother Was an Aztec. That's also an excellent, excellent book. Her last name is spelled D-I-A-Z. Yeah, those are the 2 that I would throw out.
Great. Those are some good suggestions. And I don't have any other questions coming in right. You must have answered everything in your talk already, or people are just trying to let it all soak in. So Unless something comes through right now, I think we're going to wrap up. I want to say a big thank you. We really appreciate your time and your perspective today. I want to thank everyone who tuned in to watch. As I said, your feedback's always important to us, so please make sure to look for that tab that should have opened up in your browser and give us some thoughts about today's program. And I'm going to try to share a
Thank you.
screen here so you can see the final, the lineup for the next couple of programs coming up. There we go. There's some. So like I said, we've got one tonight with Crystal Fleming. We also have next Tuesday a program about Japanese festivals hosted by the Japan America Society. And we've got our Soldiers Memorial Chow and Chat next Wednesday. The topic for that one is the war that almost was, the Missouri crisis and bleeding Missouri. So hopefully you can join us for some of those. And thanks to everyone, and thanks again to Deborah. Appreciate it.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.